You know, there's something that I've said many times in preaching that I think we need to qualify just a little bit. We talk about the fact that Israel was destroyed because of sin as a nation. And the point is often made, yes, but they were the people of God. That's true. But we need to also remember that in the Old Testament, in talking about the various nations that surrounded Israel, such as the Philistines and others, God talked about them being destroyed because of sin too. So it wasn't just that they were the people of God that made them responsible. It was the fact that there are certain principles that are true, and whether they apply to the people of God or to a nation that's simply a secular nation, it really doesn't matter, because either case, these things are principles that just cannot be ignored. You and I, as Christians, sometimes I think in modern times we're somewhat in the position that Jesus was, except that Jesus had information that we don't have access to, but we can look at his reaction and we understand just how difficult a situation it was. You remember that Jesus, as he was looking over the city of Jerusalem, he talked about the fact that how often I would have gathered you in chapter 23 of the book of Matthew in verse 37. As a hen gathereth her chicks under her wings, and you would not. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. We often speak of Jesus weeping over Jerusalem. Why? Well, he was weeping over Jerusalem because Jesus lived somewhere around 33 A.D. In 70 A.D., some 37 years later, the city of Jerusalem fell, was annihilated by the Roman armies. Why? Well, we want to talk about that a little bit this morning and talk about some principles that are involved here. There's a passage that you probably are familiar with, and it says, righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Now, some translations, rather than saying sin is a reproach to any people, will say sin is a reproach to nations. Not just the nation of Israel, but to all the nations of the earth. Sin is something that is a reproach to them. Sometimes we fail to recognize that in most cases, when we talk about criminal activity in a country, we fail to recognize that criminal activity is criminal from the standpoint of a secular government, but most criminal activity is also a sinful act. If you rob a bank, what are you doing? You're stealing. Is that a violation of God's law? Certainly. If you kill someone, what are you doing? You're committing murder. That is a crime, but that is also a sinful act. We need to stop and realize that sin is something that's the problem that we have. Now, are all sins criminal acts? No. And to the extent that they are not, they are hurtful to society. That is to say, if if sinful acts can be committed without a crime being committed, then that is going to be hurtful to us. Now, do I advocate we make every sin a crime? I'm not saying that that's not even something that comes within the realm of possibility. But it does mean that it will undermine our country. It's kind of like this. You know, you notice all these advertisements that you have for companies that are foundation repair companies. And those foundation repair companies are trying to come in and repair damage that's been done to your foundation. And in most cases, foundational damage comes from things that we neglect to tend to. We don't clean our gutters. We don't have the drainage off the land to be proper. Many different things can happen, and it just over a period of time undermines it. And when the foundation is undermined sufficiently, the house will collapse. That's what you're talking about here. When you're talking about righteousness exalteth a nation. Righteousness is the foundation of a nation. And to the extent that we live in a way that respects certain principles, that will make the nation better. But when those principles are ignored, sin is a reproach to any people and will lead to the downfall of any nation. Now, I've hesitated to talk about this because I hear people all the time saying you don't need to talk about politics. I'm not talking about politics. I'm talking about biblical principles of truth. And let's just look at them. There are three principles of truth upon which every nation in the world is built, period. And there are no exceptions to that rule if that nation is one that's going to have any chance of survival. The very first thing that has to be is we have to have respect for human life. You know, it's interesting to me. If you go back to the book of Genesis chapter 9, you think of Genesis 1 as being the beginning of time. But in a sense, Genesis 9 is also the beginning of time. It was the restart, if you please. Genesis 9 is talking about what happened when God had looked down upon the earth that had become so wicked that He destroyed all of it, except for 8 people. Those 8 people have now come off the ark, and God's giving them instruction as to how to keep from repeating the same situation. In other words, so that the world will be a better place. And here's what He said. God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, and upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even as the green herb have I given you all things. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall you not eat. And why? Surely your blood of your lives will I require at the hand of every beast will I require, and at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of a man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood by man's, shall his blood be shed. And there is a reason. For in the image of God made He man. The big problem that we have is that we live in a world that has become practically atheistic, if not theoretically atheistic. That is to say, a lot of people will openly tell you there is no God. Some folks won't tell you there is no God. They just act like there's not one. So they are practical atheists. They act like there is no God. And so all of a sudden, the special position that man occupies is taken away. With the teaching of evolution, you've been taught that you are not special, that you are simply a highly developed animal and you are of no more value than a horse, a dog, a cow, or a snake, or a mouse. It's all the same. Human beings have no particular relevance in this situation. So it's no surprise when in our country we have people who are actually literally now telling us that this will be the summer of rage. And what are we mad about? That we cannot kill our children. That's what we're mad about. We can't kill our children, so we're mad. Do you believe that that shows respect for human life? Well, I don't. Do you think a nation can continue to exist that has no respect for human life? Let me go back to something in 1 Kings chapter 24. 1 Kings 24 is really talking about, 2 Kings 24, is talking about the end of God's people, basically, in the nation, having a temple and all the things, and self-rule and all those things that made them a nation. And He tells you why. And here's what He said. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. And he turned and rebelled against him, and the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees, Syrians, Moabites, children of Ammon, and he sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by his prophets, his servants the prophets. Surely at the commandment of the Lord came this upon Judah to remove them out of his sight for the sins of Manasseh, to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood that he shed. For he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Lord would not pardon. Serious situation. Now someone says, why preach this? We can't really change it. Well, I think we at least need to be aware of what God said. I mean, my daddy used to say to me, son, I'm not talking just to hear my head rattle. I don't believe God was just talking to hear his head rattle either. When God told us that righteousness exalteth a nation and sin is a reproach to any people, I don't think he just said that we just ignore it and pretend it didn't exist. When he said we ought to have a respect for human life, I don't think y'all say, well, that's a political issue. We don't want to talk about that. That's a serious spiritual issue. That if we don't respect human life, then it's impossible to have a stable nation, period. Secondly, respect for the family. In the book of Genesis chapter 2, the family is introduced to you. And it's very clear what it is. The Lord caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. He took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord had taken from man made he a woman and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman. Now we have a Supreme Court justice who's just been interviewed and confirmed who said, I cannot define what a woman is. I don't know what a woman is. I don't believe her to begin with. But it's dangerous when we get to the point that God says what constitutes a family is a man and a woman, and we don't even know what a woman is. Or at least we claim we don't, for political expediency. And here we are in a situation today where we're ignoring what was said here. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother, shall cleave to his wife. A lot of people don't realize. Use that word wife. In the original language, that's not wife in the way you traditionally understand it. That simply means a man shall cleave unto his woman. That's what it says, literally. Defines what a marriage is. In today's world, what we've seen is all these arguments about 1,500 different genders. What do you think that's about? Destroying the family? That's what it's about. Destroying the family unit. That's all it's about. When you start saying, well, you know, doctors make mistakes at birth, that he doesn't really know what a woman and a man is. Are you crazy? Of course he does. He just chooses to pretend that it's not so. The fact is, here is what God said. A man and a woman should constitute a family. If that's true, then for the last several centuries, that has stood us in good stead. And now all of a sudden we've decided that we're going to pull the rug out from under ourselves and we're going to ignore it. And we're no longer going to in any way acknowledge that, hey, you know, the family unit is basically the building block of all societies, and without it, society will crumble. In 1 Kings chapter 14, Rehoboam became the king after Solomon died. And in verse 21 through 24, it says this. Rehoboam the son of Solomon reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city which the Lord had chose out of all the tribes of Israel to put his name. And his mother's name was Naamah, an Ammonitess, which is kind of an explanation for his behavior. And Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins which they had committed above all that their fathers had done. They built high places, images, and groves. He's talking about idolatry. On every hill, on every green tree. And then he said this. And there were also sodomites in the land. You know what a sodomite is? Just go back and read about Sodom and Gomorrah. You'll understand what it is. What we're saying today is we have, you know, I can't get all the letters because I keep adding them to them. And finally, one of them just put plus on the end, I guess, because that means whatever letter you want to add, you just keep adding it. And we want to make marriage, I don't even understand what's going on. I don't know that you can, as anybody can tell me, except for one point. The only thing I understand is that all this talk about LGBTQ plus or whatever has to do with destroying your understanding of what the traditional family is and destroying your children's understanding of what the traditional family is, so that they can tear down every semblance of morality, period. So you better be teaching your kids the truth. God created male and female. That's what a marriage is. And without it, a country will fall. Period. And then the other. Respect for the rights of others. You know, one of the things that's really interesting to me, and people don't seem to understand it at the present time, many people in this country today would like to take away your right to assemble, to worship, or to speak about God in any way. Now, if you don't believe that, then you're pretty naive and you got your head in the sand. You're here this morning at the mercy of the government that reigns over you. People in China don't possess that right. They don't have it. People in this country think, oh, that's what we need to do because it'd be easier to control everybody if you just didn't let them worship God. That way you could tell them what to do and they'd do it. You know something that's really interesting? When Jesus was asked the question, we've used this so many times, we read it over and over and over, but after all, Jesus said it is the most important principle there is. What's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is likened to it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, civil authorities do what? What is a civil authority to do? Well, it's explained to you a little bit in Romans 13, verse 3. Rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Wilt thou not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. What evil is he talking about? He's talking about things like stealing and murder and such things. You lock your door every time you leave home? Maybe I shouldn't announce it publicly, but I don't lock mine every time I leave home. Pat doesn't. We don't. Sometimes I go home, doors open. I don't think too much about it. There's so many people in and out of our house all the time, and I can't hardly lock it because I don't know who might be there, and they might need in. How can I do that? Because I have civil authorities that protect my rights. I have rights, and they protect them. If I'm riding down the road and I'm threatened, what do? Call the civil authorities, and they're supposed to protect me. But what's happening now? What's happening today when people, you do realize there are people right now that believe that you should be stopped from this assembly because you, number one, oppose abortion, and number two, oppose gay marriage and homosexual activity to be accepted as normal behavior. You are thought to be a threat to these people, and they would like to silence you. You ever ask yourself the question, why? Why do you think folks want to silence you? In 1 Peter chapter 1, chapter 5, rather, there is a statement that is made that you really need to pay attention to. You know, one of the things that just interests me a lot is I love it when they have these guys that go out on the street and they ask questions. They walk down the streets of New York City. Sometimes they actually go to the campus of the New York University. Those are two of the favorite places they go and they ask a question. They ask questions like, who is the President of the United States? I don't know. Who's the Vice President? I don't know. Who is your Senator? I don't know. And then you start talking about constitutional rights and that people don't know. Well, that's in the civil realm. I understand that. But what frightens me is that if you go out and you did that type of investigation and ask people biblical questions, it would be even worse. People in this country have no idea, as a general population, about God. It's something that we've tried to exterminate. I've said before many times. Sometimes people don't get what I'm saying, but it's pretty clear. When I was a boy, the worst time in the world to be a burglar, or the best time rather, would be Sunday morning, because just about every single person would be in church somewhere. Today, the best time to be a burglar would be Sunday morning, or the worst time, because nobody goes to church, so everybody's at home. So don't go on Sunday because they're there. We have lost respect for God. And what we need to understand is, when you go back here and you read what Peter said, he said this: Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil is a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. I sometimes meet people who say, I don't watch the news, it's too depressing. I agree with you in part. It's too depressing. But at the same time, that's kind of like saying I'm not going to watch the weather because if I don't watch it, the tornado won't blow my house down. So I say I'm not watching the news because it's too depressing. People who just really try to ignore everything. And Peter said, you better be careful about that. You need to be aware that the devil is a very effective adversary. Without a question. Very effective. And a hard worker. I remember a joke I heard one time. It was funny, but it was really true. Had a women's Bible class, and there was a lady there and never said anything bad about anybody, no matter what. And so the lady decided they finally had one that she would have to break down and say something bad. And one of the ladies said, well, what about the devil? And she said, at least he's consistent. Well, that's right. He is consistent. Never let up your guard, Peter said. He said, resist him steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished of your brethren in the world. Understand this. Satan seeks to control every man on this planet and every nation on this planet. Without a question. No doubt. And all that you see that's going on sometimes is simply Satan stirring up his servants to accomplish his purpose in destroying us. Now, that's the truth. People say, well, just Bible thumpers sometimes, you can't pay much attention to them. But let me tell you one of the things that is a telltale sign that you should always pay attention to. In John 1 and 5, the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. But in chapter 3, he's a little more explicit. In chapter 3, he says, beginning in verse 18, He that believeth on him is not condemned, but he that believeth not is condemned already, because he hath not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the condemnation. Now notice it. That light is come into the world. And men loved darkness more than light, because their deeds are evil. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God. Have you ever, since you've been seeing this whole abortion question as a good example, this whole abortion question, have you seen any time that a person who favors abortion coming to someone who is opposed to it and say, let's have a discussion and let's publicize it? You seen it? Have you seen any person who advocates abortion saying, we want these people who oppose it to be heard and we want to consider both sides of the question? You ever saw that? I have not. And why? With the discovery of DNA in Psalms 139 about us being fearfully and wonderfully made, and it's dictated what we're going to do the day we're conceived, every argument ends. So everybody knows that. Why do you think that people don't want it to be argued before the Supreme Court? Because the truth is absolutely obvious. And the only way that you can actually oppose it is don't let the other side be heard. And that's it. You see the same thing in religious issues. How many times do you see a person who says that baptism is not essential salvation call me up and say, let's debate that? Never. If you know you don't have the truth, you don't want to discuss it. You just don't love the light, you love evil, and you want to do what's evil, and you're going to do it. That's the truth. Satan's biggest challenge that Satan has is just keep the truth down. Don't let the truth be heard. All this discussion about suppression of truth today has to do with Satan. Now, I'm not going to read all that he says here in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 1 beginning. Well, let's read it, because it's a great lesson. We beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, by our gathering together with Him, that you be not shaken in mind. Now, this is a good thing to consider, because we're kind of there. Don't be shaken in mind or be troubled, neither by spirit, neither by word, nor by a letter from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. Notice what he does. He opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God. You know that every person who says there is no God says, I'm God. That's what they're saying. There is no God, and here's what the truth is, so I'm God. That's what they're saying. Every one of them. And he says, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. People don't want to be governed by any absolute truths. We want subjective truths, so I'm my own God. That's what I am. Remember you not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things? And now you know that withholdeth that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. I don't know if this is specifically referring to any particular time. Could be conferring, as some people say, to the Catholic Church. I don't know. Or it may be a generic statement that can apply to everybody, including the people of our time who are out there trying to suppress truth. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. Then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Even him whose coming is with the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness and unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, they might be saved. For this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie. How many people today do you know that believe a lie? An outright lie, and that's the real problem. That they all might be damned who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Just think about it. What do you think our problem is? People have pleasure in doing what they want to do. Now that's the truth, and we need to understand it. The only way to protect ourselves, the only way you can protect yourself from all this, because it's there. The only way to protect yourself is you shall know the truth, and truth shall make you free. That's it. Satan knows that too. Why do you think that everything in the world is being done to make sure that this book is stamped out as having any... I mean, just think about it for a moment. You see signs in these demonstrations before the Supreme Court. What are they telling you? Basically, they're saying, your religion you need to give up because of my rights. No matter if it's the truth. You need to give it up because of my rights. You know, it's interesting to me that our founding fathers in our country, and I'm trying not to present a political lesson, but we've got problems that are spiritual problems. We've got to address them. Our founding fathers understood one thing. They may have been wrong about a lot of things, but they understood that we have certain inalienable rights, but who gave them to us? Our Creator. They understood that. They understood we go back to this book for some of the basic answers. Doctrinally, they didn't much deal with it, but those three principles that we talked about, respect for life, the idea of us having personal liberties and our families being as God describes them, they understood that. You look at it. You consider how everything's been until present when folks have just kind of gone off the rails. You know, I've preached a lot of lessons. I've hinted at a lot of these things. And I've thought about it, and I know people say, don't preach political issues. I've tried not to preach a political issue. I'm just addressing what God had to say in His Word. And I'm going to tell you, you better pay some attention to it, because the most dangerous thing is not whether this country stands or falls, but whether you lose your soul or not. That's what's dangerous. And we need to understand that. Don't be sucked in to think, oh, I need to kind of go along because that way our country can continue to exist and I can continue to have all the things I enjoy and I love. That's a dangerous position to have. Exactly what happened to the rich young ruler can happen to us. If you're not a Christian, you know, Jesus said, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. That's a pretty definitive statement. Luke said that those who were baptized were added to the church daily such as should be saved. That's what he said. What is the church? It is the called out body of people who have devoted themselves to God. Now, you say, oh, but the laws of the land. Okay, laws of the land, fine. But remember one thing. When Peter was questioned about the same point, what did he say? I got to obey God rather than men. I mean, you can't say, well, the law allows me to marry a man, so I'm going to go marry one. But God said you can't, so therefore you can't. Now, can you get by with it in our government? Yeah. You can get by with all kinds of sin. They're not illegal. But remember one thing. One of these days, every one of these people, both you and I, and all those who are protesting, and all those who are serving over our country, are going to stand before God in judgment, give an account for the deeds done in the flesh. Understand that. And therefore, this is a relevant lesson. Make sure you're prepared for that day. Pay some attention. Can we solve all these problems? Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. We can't become an army and fight and overthrow the government of the United States. It's not even what God prescribed. He just said, you be righteous in your life and understand the truth. And hopefully, lessons been of some benefit to you. Together we stand as we sing.